Hey, happy Mother's Day. I'm Travis, and if we haven't had an opportunity to meet, I'd love to meet you in the atrium when the service is over. And if you're online, feel free to send an email, say hello. But it is Mother's Day. We're in a series we're wrapping up today called Say What, where we have taken a look at some popular statements, some popular religious statements that have kind of been floating around in our culture for a long time, and then we've gone and looked at the Bible to see what the Bible has to say about them. Today's phrase that we'll be looking at is the phrase that God will not give us more than we can handle. All right? Now, we on purpose picked that phrase for today, Mother's Day, because oftentimes, moms, right, you can feel overwhelmed, right? You can feel overwhelmed in your role as a mom. You kind of look at God and go, wait a minute, this is more than I can handle. And so just to give a glimpse of what moms have to put up with, the world that moms live in, we actually took a moment and asked some preschoolers some questions about their mom. Watch this video.
Do you know what's next week?
Yes!
What?
Friday! Mother's Day!
Mother's Day.
So,
Do you like your mom?
This she has a pretty dress.
If you had to take a guess, how old do you think she is?
33. Oh, like 74.
99.
Do you know your mom's name? What's your mom's name, Brayden?
Mommy. Mommy.
What's
Okay.
something your mom always says?
I know.
Oh my gosh.
My mom said, I love you. And I?
Is your mom a cookie dinner?
She cooks my dinner and she sometimes makes cookies. She makes me carrots,
Pancakes.
pancakes, broccoli, everything.
I love Brussels sprouts too. She makes me Brussels sprout pancakes.
Make salad all the time. Mac and cheese.
What are you going to say to mom on Mother's Day?
Happy Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day.
Happy Mother's Day!
That's the world that moms live in, right? My favorite, though, and I'm not kidding about this, my favorite was the kid. What does your mom always say? They said, she cusses. Now, fortunately, I don't have kids that age because I had, was that one of my kids? But no, I'm just playing. No, that really wasn't what a kid said. I loved every bit of that. I was wishing it was a staff kid. If so, we'd have put that in the video. That would have made it for sure. Now, how many of y'all have heard that phrase, though, God won't give you more than you can handle? How many of you have heard that? Yeah? All right, how many of you have said that phrase before? All right, I'm raising my, I've said it before. All right, just don't be shy. All right, cool, good. All right. Now, here's the deal. I've said it. And, as you think through it, we say that phrase to people really with an innocent motivation. I mean, we're trying to help. It's a positive motivation. We're saying it innocently, not really thinking about what we're saying or even necessarily considering subconsciously how that's going to land or how that's going to be interpreted. But we say it to try to be helpful. We're trying to offer comfort to a person, maybe in a moment where we're not quite sure what to say. Sometimes there's just some moments that are so heavy, you're like, and you just kind of go back to kind of things you've heard before, and you say, oh, God's not going to give us more than we can handle. And even though I've said it myself, when I think back, though, I think back and I just think, I'm not quite sure it was really as helpful as I was hoping it to be. It wasn't quite as helpful as I thought it was going to be, because even for me, when I hear that statement said to me, there's a couple of things that come to mind. One is, where is God in all of this? Like, I'm facing this trial, this struggle, this difficulty. Where is God in all this? And if you missed, in my mind, this is kind of like part 2 of where we started last week talking about suffering. And so when it comes to the concept of where is God in all this, I would reference you back to last week's message. If you didn't catch that, you can go catch that on our website or on our Facebook page, or on our YouTube page. But you're just thinking through, where is God? The second thing that comes to my mind is, you have no clue what I'm going through. Someone comes along and you're trying to give them snippets or a soundbite of something that's really a struggle in your life. You don't have enough time to unpackage all that's really going on beneath the surface. And someone says, well, God's not going to give you more than you handle. And my mind just goes to, you have no idea. You have no clue how deep the pain goes or how deep the roots of struggle are in my life right now. We're going to look at 2 Corinthians chapter 1 today, so if you have a copy of God's Word, you can turn to there. We're just going to look at the first chapter, but we're going to see 4 things that happen when we face trials in life. So the first one, we're going to look at a few verses in 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 3 says this, "Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies and the God of all comfort. He comforts us in all our affliction so that we may be able to comfort those who are in any kind of affliction through the comfort we ourselves receive from God." Verse 5, "For just as the sufferings of Christ overflow to us, so also through Christ our comfort overflows." And the first thing we see here in terms of what happens in our lives when trials come is that it draws us closer to God. See, when we say God won't give us more than we can handle, what we really need to think about is how do we define the we? When we say we, sometimes it's actually said, God won't give you more than you can handle, and that's probably one way to define we if you say it in the plural. But when you say we, if you mean just you individually by yourself, kind of pulling yourself up by the bootstraps, then that statement is actually false. God will give you more than you personally can handle. But if you mean by we, if you mean us kind of linking arms with the God of the universe, God Almighty, the one who's sovereign over all, if you're talking about, hey, God's not going to give us more than we, meaning me and the Lord, kind of like linked up together, well, then that statement is true. God won't give you more than what He can tackle and you can tackle with His help together. That then now becomes a true statement. Why? Because what Paul shows us here is that there is divine purpose at work in our life and in my life and in your life, and that divine purpose begins with God. That's why Paul calls Him here. He calls God the Father of mercy and the God of all comfort. Now, our youngest child is Paige. She was born in September of 2019. She was about 6 months old when the pandemic hit, and so the last year of her life kind of been lived in pandemic mode, which is different than the rest of how my kids experienced their earliest 18 months of life. But here we are with Paige, and she's what we kind of would call like a pandemic baby. And sure enough, if I've read some articles and seen some things that talk about how babies right now are loving going out to restaurants because all of the faces they've seen through the pandemic were either on a television screen or they were covered up in masks everywhere they've gone. But now that they're going out to restaurants, they're seeing other people's faces, and it's engaging for them to see faces of other people than just their immediate family unit, right? I don't know if you got tired of your immediate family during the pandemic, but apparently babies did, right? So they're looking out, they're engaged in all the stuff. Paige, for us, meant during the pandemic, she spent a lot of time with us, a lot of time with her siblings, a lot of time with mom and dad. And what happens now is we're trying to get babysitters to come over so that Mary Julie and I can go out or take one of our children out for something. So the babysitter shows up. You know what happens in our house now because she grew up during the pandemic is what happens is the babysitter comes in and all of a sudden Paige sticks that arm out like this and she's eyeing the babysitter, like I got my eyes locked on you, don't pull a fast one, and she starts taking half steps towards me, right? And she's like this, and her eyes aren't moving and she's just reading out like, Dad, I know you're out there somewhere, help. And sure enough, you know what I do in that moment? I squat down, I put my hand out, she wraps her little fingers around my pinky. I scoop her up, pull her up in my lap. I stand up, I hold her, kind of like hold her real tight, and I kiss her cheek. And then after that, I sit her on the couch, turn on her favorite cartoon, and I run out the door. That's true. I really do that. Gotta go, see ya. If you need me, text me. Lock the door. And so, sure enough, that is true. Here's what I want in that moment, though. I just want Paige to have some comfort. I'm not staying all day. I really am going to leave. Dad's got to go to work. Dad's got to go somewhere. Dad's taking mom out. I am leaving, but I do want you to feel comfort. I love her, and I care about her, and I scoop her up. I will scoop her up all the time. I'll kiss her cheek, and I just hold her tight, but then Dad's got to go. And I'm out the door, and I'm running, but here's the deal. I don't perfectly do that. I'm an imperfect dad. And yet, I don't think there's a time Paige is ever going to do one of these where I'm not willing to grab her hand, scoop her up, give her a hug, give her a kiss, and say goodbye. I don't think there's ever a time that will ever stop. And here I am as an imperfect dad, and if I'm never going to stop doing that for my children, how much do you think our Heavenly Father is willing to go to show His comfort for us? Is He going to do less than an imperfect father? No, if anything, God's going to do far more than that. God's going to go to extreme lengths to show his comfort that he has for us. And so we need to understand in verse 4, he says he comforts us in all of our affliction. Now you say, all of our affliction? Yeah. God's not looking from heaven on earth. God's not looking and going, well, like that's like a level 2 struggle, so I don't know if I'll show up for that one. That was last week, but now that this week's struggle is like a 6.5, I'll probably intervene and I'll kind of show up on the scene. No, God's there for all of our affliction and all of our struggle and all of our issues in life that seem overwhelming to us. That means when we're sick, guess what? God's at our bedside. When you run out of money and you are dirt poor, that means God's with you in your poverty. When you're hated and despised by people, he stands by your side. And when you walk, as the psalmist writes, when you walk through the valley of the shadow of death, it means he takes you by the hand and he's leading you through that valley. Here's what this means for us. It means we never discover the depths of God's compassion until we get in a place where we need God's compassion desperately. That moment where we're looking where there's nowhere else to turn, we're really in trouble, that is in the moment where we start to receive God's mercy and it pours out in our life. There's a guy, Tom, he goes to our Greenview campus. He used to attend here. He attends Greenview. I try not to take it personally, but he's a great guy. From New York, fast talker, you got to kind of lean in a little bit. It's got the gift of sarcasm, which I have a great appreciation for. And so he talks about his story. If you see Tom's got a patch on his eye. It's like once you meet him, you'll never forget him. He used to sit right over here. And when I first met him, the first Sunday, I walked up and he goes, "Hey, my name's Tom, but call me Patch." And I'm like, yeah, man, can I say, I'm a pastor. I'm supposed to be nice to people. Can I say that? And he's like, yeah, man, all my friends, all the people that love me, they call me Patch. And I'm like, okay, Patch. And so, Patch. And Patch is over at Greenview. And one of the things about his story he talks about is like he was living life his own way. He was miserably living life his own way, doing things how he wanted to do it. He was like, I was kind of arrogant. And it was the way of New York, you know, I was getting it. And he said, finally, it came to the point where I had some medical issues and that if they weren't taken care of, it may have meant that I would lose my life. And so they had to take my eye away. And he said, but through that time, God just kind of totally brought me to the end of myself. And it was in that moment where I heard the gospel truth and my heart was inclined and I put my trust and faith in Jesus Christ while I was going through the trial of losing my eye. And he goes, I'll tell you this, I would never go back. There's nothing in the world. Give me my eye back. There's nothing in the world I would trade for a relationship with Jesus Christ. It's so much better now. And I think that's a really good perspective because I think the Apostle Paul would look at that writing to the church at Corinth and he'd go, I totally agree, Tom. High five, Patch. Man, I'm for you. I believe that because losing your vision is not easy. Losing an eye is not fun. It's not even good in and of itself. But if that's the channel for much good in your time of sickness, and God uses that moment so that you can figure out the difference between what matters and what doesn't matter, it was for your good. We need to understand it's going to be for our benefit, that it can be a very deep blessing in our lives through sickness sometimes if we discover that God's comfort is better and more powerful and greater than our sorrow. So sometimes we face trials and struggles in life so that it draws us close to God. The second thing we find is in verse 6. It says, if we are afflicted, it's for your comfort and salvation. If we are comforted, it is for your comfort, which produces in you patient endurance of the same sufferings that we suffer. Essentially, Paul's saying here is like, yeah, we all kind of have similar struggles in life. Verse 7, and our hope for you is firm because we know that as you share in the sufferings, you also share in the comfort. The second thing that we learn about our trials is that it equips us to minister to people. That there's some things you walk through in life, and after you walk through them and you've received comfort from God, all of a sudden it positions you to help other people. Paul had a lot of hardship. Paul had a very difficult life. Lots of suffering, lots of hardship, deprivation, imprisonment, and he had just an unrelenting opposition towards him that he faced almost his entire life. And he concludes, you know what? This isn't just for me. Those trials were not just for my benefit, for God to grow me up and mature me and bring me in closer relationship to Him. It was also for someone else. It was for the benefit of others. Now, this isn't a question we often ask ourselves, but it's very worthwhile thinking through like a biblical lens for the world. Is it possible that God gives us more than we can handle, not only for our benefit, where it is drawing us closer to the Lord, it is growing us up, it is maturing us? But could it be that God gives us more than we can handle, not just for our benefit, but for the benefit of other people as well? That God's going to let us walk through something so that later on there's going to be someone that comes along and has a similar suffering that we're going to be able to connect with? You know, I just think back, there are moments of life where I feel like humanity cheated me, where I'm like, why didn't somebody tell me that, right? Like one of those is coaching or watching your kids play sports. No one ever told me that sometimes I'm going to want it more than my kid's going to want it. You know what I'm saying? Where I'm like, get it, go for it. And they're like, I don't care. Look at, there's dirt. Did you know there's dirt? What? No, come on. You know, there's moments of that no one told me about. No one also told me about some things like miscarriage. You know, just a guy growing up. I don't know the statistics. Tell you one thing though, after we started having kids, realized that miscarriages are way more common than I ever could wrap my mind around. Had no clue until we went through one. And you know what happened? Almost seemingly out of the woodworks, people that had gone, oh yeah, we had a miscarriage. Yeah, us too. We did too. We went through one. We had 3. I mean, it was just amazing, the people that came out and just loved on us in that time of need, where I had no clue. No one prepped me for that. Someone failed me telling me that. Like humanity just didn't prep me for that, but it was amazing. God had other people that had walked through some struggles in life who knew exactly what we needed, when we needed it. Sometimes it wasn't even that they had the right words, because no one has the right words for that. It was just people being present and opening up. Even this week, I got a text from a guy. I wasn't necessarily like a low point, but it was like, gosh, shot me a text out of the blue. Hey man, I'm thinking of you. If you need anything, call me. Man, just put a little wind in the sails. And it was amazing. God uses other people to just rally around us. The truth is, we never suffer alone. There is someone always watching. You think about moms in the home, your kids are watching how you live your life. Even if you're not having a conversation in the car, they're watching, they're leaning in, they've got an ear in to what's happening in the world around you. They're watching you. And sure enough, our friends are watching to see how we respond to tragedy when bad things happen to us. Our friends who may not know the Lord are watching to see if what we really believe is true and if it's really enough to get us through the hard times. Is it really real? Even on the outside of that, we probably have what I would just call acquaintances, people on the fringe of our lives, who are kind of in the shadows of our life, but they know, they've heard the news, they know we're going through a really difficult time. And they're watching from the darkness of our lives. They're watching, is Christ really real for them? And they don't know, and they aren't sure, and maybe they've read a smidgen of the Bible, or maybe none of it at all, but they're watching to see how we respond to mistreatment. They're watching to see how we respond to false accusations. They're watching to see how we respond when there's a serious illness in the family. They're watching us as we lose a job, or there's an end to a marriage, or there's a career setback, or there's a financial collapse. And from the shadows, they will eventually peer out. And they're just looking to see and to watch the suffering to see if it's really real or not. That's what the Apostle Paul's talking about here. He says, hey, look, our afflictions really soften us. They soften us to the idea of helping and ministering to other people. That when we go through affliction and we need God, and God showers comfort into our lives, it then opens the door for us to make an easy pass of that comfort onto other people. You know, it's easy for us to be callous. You have a difficult personality at work, and it just is easy to go, man, people make me sick. I'm tired of them. You find a lady, it's just difficult to talk to. It's just kind of a battle every time you talk, and you think, man, it's so convenient to be unkind to them. And then all of a sudden, if you find callousness in your heart, it's easy for you to take a step back, and you start looking at people down the nose of your pride and arrogance. You look at other people who you think are weaker, and you look at them and you go, oh man, if they would just toughen up. Man, if they would just grow a backbone. You know, if they would just stop complaining and get on with their lives. Why can't those people be strong like we're strong? Why can't they do that? And all of a sudden, affliction comes into our life, and it softens our heart to not be so harsh and to be so callous and to be so unkind to people. I really do think that God oftentimes lets us go through hard times to break us of that kind of attitude. And it softens us to the opportunities that are always surrounding us to minister and to speak good hope and truth and even healing into other people's lives based upon how God's taken care of us. You think about the great Chuck Colson who went to prison. His time in prison was miserable. It was an awful experience. And then yet coming out of prison, what did he do? He turned around and created Prison Fellowship, where lots of ministry has gone on behind prison walls because he took his own experience and how God comforted him and turned it for good, for a lifetime. You think of Joni Eareckson Tada, who was paralyzed during a diving accident as a teenager, and she was quadriplegic after that moment, and all of a sudden she takes her moment of suffering, and out of it she creates a worldwide ministry for hurting people called Joni and Friends. It's still going on today, and there's still a very vibrant piece of that ministry that's going on out of all her suffering and how God had tended to her heart and her needs and her mental processes. God, being in those moments with her, then launches this amazing ministry to go help other people that are found in the same kind of suffering that she experienced. I'm telling you, many of us have hardened places in our lives that will not become tender until we go through some fires of affliction. And God lets that happen so that we might reach out to others and comfort them as well. The third thing we find is in verse 8. It says this: we don't want you to be unaware, brothers and sisters, of our affliction that took place in Asia. We were completely overwhelmed. Sounds like he had more than he could handle. Beyond our strength, so that we even despaired of life itself. Indeed, we felt that we had received the sentence of death, so that we would not trust in ourselves, but in God who raises the dead. He has delivered us from such a terrible death, and he will deliver us. We have put our hope in him that he will deliver us again. Here's a third thing that trials do to us. It empties us of our self-reliance. I love that Paul would be so honest and go, man, we were overwhelmed. It was beyond our strength. We despaired for life. See, what happens is it's not so much that God won't give us more than we can handle. It's so much more that he won't give us more than we can handle with his help. If he's teamed up with us, we can't go through that. We have no clue what Paul was going through when he was in Asia, which is modern-day Turkey, the area he was in at the time. We have no clue. It could have been extreme oppression from the Jewish leaders. It could have been some kind of a physical ailment that was really a struggle for him. Whatever it was, though, the Corinthians knew about it, and they understood that Paul was going through such a difficult deal that he was at the edge of his life where he thought, we're going to die. He was in total, utter despair, and he's going, man, I'm not going to make it. And he writes to tell the Corinthians about God's deliverance in his life and to ask them for his prayers. I'm just telling you, when it comes to our lives, when tragedy strikes or when hard times come or when friends turn against us or when the bottom drops out of life, don't we look around and we wonder why? We talked about last week. You look around and you're like, man, what is going on? What's the purpose behind this? But yet we find one important explanation here, and it's this: hard times come to teach us not to trust in ourselves, but only in the Lord who raises the dead. Not in ourselves. We don't have enough strength. We don't have enough know-how. We don't have enough self-help that we can do. We really need the help of someone, and it comes in the form of the Lord. Now here's the deal. In real living, right, most of us are adept to navigating what I would just call moderate problems of life, right? We know what to do with a cranky child. You give them suckers, right? And as a dad, I'm not above a bribe, okay? So I'm like, whatever it takes for you to just stop, right? And so a cranky child, we can navigate that. We have millions of times collectively, haven't we? We've got great volunteers that are back there handling some of the crankiness right now even. We can get through that. We can deal with a prickly boss, right? A boss that's difficult. We can navigate that. We can get through that. We can deal with a bad case of the flu that kind of knocks us down for a few days. We can navigate that. We can deal with the pile of work that shows up on our desk on Friday afternoon. Boom! And you thought you were almost out of the office. You can navigate and deal with that. We understand the normal pressures that are in our world, and we've learned how to deal with them. But I'm talking about there are just times in life where it feels like the gears of life have been stripped out. You know what I'm talking about? You ever had that moment where you just feel like things are fine, it kind of came out of nowhere, you didn't see it coming, and it just feels like the engine of life has just totally dropped out of the bottom of the car. And all of a sudden where we find ourselves is we find ourselves on our knees begging God. And yet the pressures of life sometimes don't stop there. Even though it makes us get to our knees, all of a sudden we get down on our face because the pressures of life are so pressing, and they're so heavy, and they're so weighty. And it's in that moment where there's nothing around us that can help. All of our human options are foreclosed, and our only hope is in the Lord. And we cry out to God in desperation, knowing that if God doesn't help us, there is no help left. And we're going to be sunk in that moment. And this is a lesson that we need to learn over and over and over and over again. This week I received a message from one of our members. She just said, hey, I lost my best friend of 42 years a couple weeks ago. And it's been devastating. It's my best friend. We lived lots of life together. We've got years and years of memories together. And it hurts to say goodbye to my best friend. And she said, but yet, then this week, I was notified that the little girl that was in our wedding as our flower girl, they're close friends of our family. She was 24 years old, and she passed away. Like, her mom messaged me and said, hey, they're searching for her right now. We're not sure. And I don't know if you saw the news or not of the young lady, the 24-year-old lady that fell off a cliff at Red River Gorge. That's the girl. And she says, I feel like God's given me more than I can handle. And it does. And in my response back to her, I just said, yeah, life is too much for any of us to bear alone. That's life. I mean, she's not the only human being to go through tragedy like that. I'm just saying, if we had time and an open mic, we'd have hours of moments where we feel like the gears of life have been stripped out. And all of a sudden, if we're banking in that moment on our own self-reliance, it won't cut it. You think you can just muster it up laying in bed in the morning. When you get up, I'll just muster it up and I'll get dressed and I'll go to work and I'll just power through. You can't do that forever. It will crush you. She's saying in her utter despair, where do I turn? But there's nowhere to turn but the Lord. And Paul says here, He's the Lord that's powerful enough to raise the dead. That's the only place we can turn in our time of despair. And so one of the things that trials teach us, and this is a positive, trials teach us that we can't be self-reliant, that we're not enough for ourselves. We need something more than that. And thankfully, God makes Himself readily available to us. The fourth thing we see is in verse 11. It's the way it's written here is part of a sentence. So I'll go back to the end of verse 10. It says, we have put our hope in Him that He will deliver us again while you join in helping us by your prayers. Then many will give thanks on our behalf for the gift that came to us through the prayers of many. The last thing we see is it reveals the true power of prayer. When we go through a struggle in life, the power of prayer becomes very, very evident for us. I love the phrase that Paul uses here. You help us by your prayers. You help us by praying for us. Now, what's interesting here is Paul uses a word. This is the only time it's used in the whole New Testament. And when you're trying to interpret that kind of stuff, it makes it kind of interesting because you don't have other reference points to kind of connect the dots. This is the only place he uses this word. It's a compound word that means three different things. It means with, it means under, and it means work. With, under, work. As I was thinking about that, it took my mind to one of our favorite places to go is a lake outside of Bowling Green. And around that lake is a lot of Amish influence. There's a massive Amish community that lives there. And you have to be careful because as you go through the country highways and you go through some sharp turns, you got to be careful not to take them too fast because you could easily come up on a horse and buggy. And so you just kind of slowly navigate and watch and pay attention. And I'll never forget, one of the times I was going through this area is I looked over in a field and there were probably like 50 or 60 guys all out there and they were doing a barn raising. And it was so cool to just see their tight-knit community all showing up together with. And then what happened is once they were all together with, they all got under. Now, there were a handful of guys that had ropes, but everyone else got under. And there were all these men, even teenagers, you could tell like teenage boys, they were kind of showing them like, guys, here's the moment, right? Welcome to manhood. And all of a sudden they get under, right? So they were with, and then they got under, and then they did the work. And sure enough, they kind of like hand ladder that wall up. You know, the other guys are pulling with the ropes and they're hand walling it up. And sure enough, boom, the side of that barn goes up. It was with, under, work combined together. And sure enough, in the same way, when we join together to lift the burdens of life through each other, Paul says here the best way to do it is through prayer, that we would pray for one another. See, oftentimes, I just think we think of prayer as like a last resort, and Paul's going, no, it's the first resort. It's not where you end up when there's nothing else. It's where you show up first. It's the first plan of attack. You know, sometimes we think that prayer is just kind of futile, that we need to do something, you know, like we're Americans, so we do something. And so we think, I might pray, but I need to bake a cake. There's nothing wrong with that. But what we need to be careful of is we need to be careful that we don't think of one thing as spiritual and one thing as practical. They're just collectively together spiritual. And they're both helpful, right? You show up with the cake to go, hey, I love you. I did an act of love to provide the cake, but I've been praying for you. And they go together hand in glove. And really, if anything, if you were trying to kind of put them on the scale, Paul's saying the heavy side should go towards prayer. Make the cake, but you pray before the cake, you pray while you're making the cake, you pray after the cake, you pray with them when you give them the cake, and then after you go back home to your house, you keep praying. Because it's not just something that you do when there's nothing else available. You do it because it's the most powerful thing available to us. Paul argues that through prayer, we unleash the power of heaven for the problems that we're facing here on earth. And so if anything, we should be praying more. We shouldn't be praying less when trouble comes. When trials come, we lean heavily on the Lord and all the people that God's surrounding around us to support us. And they send their prayers and they strengthen us. Knowing other people are praying for us strengthens us. What we understand from the scripture here is that God has ordained our prayers so they actually matter. They actually count. They're worthwhile. They're meaningful. They have an impact. It really does make a difference whether we pray or not. Paul's saying here, I thought I was going to die. I was at the edge. I couldn't be pushed any further. And I thought I was going to die. And then you prayed, and God delivered me. Through your prayers, God rescued me. Now, I'll tell you this, we'll never know on this side of heaven how many times prayers have rescued us. But I really do believe that in that great day when all the secrets are revealed, we will discover that we would have fallen, but someone prayed for us. And I would say, thinking about Mother's Day in this room, there have been countless prayers prayed by our moms and our grandmothers for the people that are in this room and the audience that's watching online right now. Countless prayers on our behalf. And we need to consider what those prayers have meant in our life. I'm telling you, we would have given up, but someone prayed for us. We would have made a stupid decision, but someone prayed for us. We would have given in to temptation, but someone prayed for us. We would have retaliated against that person, but someone prayed for us. We would have crumbled under the pressure, but someone prayed for us. And when all is said and done, we will learn that God used the prayers of others to enable us to make the journey from earth to heaven. Now, here's the deal. I really do think mom has prayed a lot of prayers and grandmas have prayed a lot of prayers. And I know that if your mom or your grandmother is a spiritual lady and she loved the Lord, I know for a matter of fact, one of the prayers that she's been praying for a long time is that you would know the Lord, that you would have a relationship with Jesus Christ where He forgives you of your sin and He becomes a part of your life and you get to enjoy Him forever and ever in heaven when you die, because He says He stores up a place for us. And I just want to make the offer today that maybe today is the answer to the prayer that your mom or grandmother has been praying for generations potentially, even for those of you watching online. That in this moment, would you say clearly, confidently you have a relationship with the Lord, or is that something that you need to be a part of your life? You need God's help to walk alongside the trials and the sufferings of this life to come. Well, then today I just want to make available to you, I'll be out in the atrium. Our staff will be available. We'd love to talk to you about how you can put your trust and faith in Jesus Christ alone. If you're online, you can text the word TALK to 77411, and that'll start a conversation with our staff. But if you're here in the room today, as you walk out those center doors, there's a white table to the left of the glass doors before you leave, and it's easy. We got volunteers there and staff. It's easy to connect with someone to talk about how you can have a relationship with Jesus. But here's the deal. We want to end the service today with a blessing. Because just as Paul talked about the power of prayer being a blessing in us, saved us from who knows what, the prayers of moms, grandmas have paid dividends of blessing in our lives over and over and over again. And really, it's one of the ways that God blesses our lives. Now, it's not true for every mom. I know there's some anomalies in that. But if your mom pointed you towards Jesus, you should be really grateful for her. If your grandmother pointed you towards Jesus, you should be really grateful for her. So just really as a gift back, we're going to honor the Lord by honoring our moms. And in that, our worship team is going to sing a blessing over moms as we end our service today. Here we go.